Usually when we talk about reading a familiar story, there is this expectation of comfort.
Oh, absolutely.
Like
Yeah.
revisiting an old childhood neighborhood, right? You know
Mhm.
where the house is. You know where the big oak tree is. It's safe.
Right, because it's a known landscape.
Yeah,
You have a shared understanding with everyone else who has read that exact same story.
exactly.
You all agree on who the hero is, who the villain is, and what the moral of the story is supposed to be.
Right. But then, imagine you step into that exact same neighborhood and someone hands you a pair of polarized glasses.
Okay, I like this.
You put them on, and suddenly that safe, familiar map transforms into a blueprint for a massive, hidden underground complex.
Oh, wow. So the familiar is completely subverted.
Completely. The house isn't a house, it's a decoy. That oak tree isn't just a tree, it's the antenna for a global transmission.
Right.
And the path you always walked. It was actually leading you into a trap the entire time. Today, we're looking at a text that hands us those polarized glasses.
It really does. It takes the foundational stories of human history, Genesis, the historical prophets, the psychedelia revelation, the visions in Daniel, and just, well, turns them into a cryptographic blueprint.
A blueprint of a massive global deception. And we really need to state right up front, this material does not pull its punches.
No, it definitely does.
It names modern geopolitical powers, it takes ancient religious structures to task, and it essentially labels the entire global religious establishment a cult.
Which is, an incredibly heavy accusation.
Massive. And just to be absolutely clear to you listening, our job today isn't to take a side, endorse this worldview, or validate its claims.
Right. We're here as forensic analysts.
Exactly. We want to look at the architecture of how this text builds such a radical argument. If it makes a controversial claim, we are going to tear into the mechanics of how it justifies that claim using the source material.
Treating the whole thing as a wildly intricate intellectual puzzle, because it is a text that requires a complete suspension of our traditional assumptions.
We're looking at the exact same data points, right? The
Yeah.
exact same ancient words.
Yes, but the architecture of meaning has been entirely inverted. It asks us to view the Bible not as a standard theological history, but as a unified theory of an ongoing planetary scale manipulation.
Right. No endorsements, just pure exploration. And the overarching premise here, the hook that drives this entire interpretation is deeply unsettling.
It really makes you question everything.
It does. It asks, well, what if the story of the Garden of Eden wasn't just a historical beginning or a moral fable? What if it was a detailed schematic for a spiritual conspiracy?
Right, and what if the snake in the garden didn't just crawl away, but actually grew, mutated, and evolved into a planetary dragon?
Yes, and perhaps most provocatively, what if the entire modern world is walking around completely drunk on what the text calls fake wine?
Oh, the fake wine concept is fascinating.
We'll definitely get into that. But the idea that everyone is drunk, waiting for an enigmatic figure it calls the Eastern sage to finally sober us up.
It's a framework that takes the familiar and renders it totally alien.
Yeah.
And by doing so, it forces the reader to ask profound questions about the nature of truth, the mechanics of mass deception, and, the structures of authority that we blindly take for granted.
Every single day. So to really grasp the gravity of what this text is proposing, we cannot start at the end of the world.
No, we have to start at the root. Literally, we have to go back to Genesis.
Genesis chapter 2, verse 9, the two trees.
Exactly. Because this text initiates a total ground-up redefinition of the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil.
And, in almost every standard Sunday school class or theological seminar, the tree of knowledge of good and evil is viewed as the mechanism of the original sin,
Right. It's the forbidden fruit that Adam and Eve ate.
which brought mortality and moral awareness like guilt, shame into the human experience.
That's the traditional historical reading. But this text completely discards that. It turns the two trees into a real-time diagnostic tool for the present day.
Wait, a real-time diagnostic tool? How does it do that?
Well, the methodology here is fascinating. The text pairs the Genesis account of the trees with Matthew chapter 24.
Okay, the Olivet Discourse.
Right, where Jesus warns that many false prophets will arise and deceive many people. The text takes those two completely disparate passages and fuses them.
So it connects the tree directly to the prophets.
Yes. It claims that the vast majority of prophets, and he uses that term as a catch-all for the entire mainstream religious establishment.
Regardless of the specific denomination.
Exactly. It says they are actually false prophets. And crucially, it equates these institutional false prophets directly with the tree of knowledge of good and evil.
Oh, wow. So it's arguing that the fruit of the tree of knowledge isn't a literal apple or even a metaphor for ancient human curiosity.
No, not at all.
The fruit is the doctrine. It's the sermons, the books, the rituals, the entire output of these religious leaders.
You got it. The text sets up this incredibly stark binary. On one side, you have the tree of knowledge, representing a massive, crowded industry of false prophets.
And on the other side,
You have the tree of life, representing the one singular true prophet.
okay, but how does the text justify connecting an entire massive industry to the tree of knowledge?
It actually leverages the very name of the tree to make its point. Think about it. The tree of knowledge of good and evil.
Okay.
What does mainstream religion primarily do? It legislates morality. It dictates what is good and what is evil.
Oh, I see. It provides extensive knowledge on how to behave, how to dress, what to eat, who to shun.
Exactly. The text is suggesting that an obsession with moral categorization and behavior modification is actually the hallmark of the false tree.
Because it looks like religion.
Right. It sounds holy, but it is entirely focused on the external.
Which brings up this ultimate litmus test the text proposes. It essentially says, walk up to a pastor, a priest, a Taoist monk, any religious figure with a title and a congregation.
Right. Any authority figure.
Ask them to explain what the tree of life actually is.
And this is where it gets really confrontational.
It really does. The text claims that if they cannot explain the functional reality of the tree of life, they are undeniably a false prophet. They belong to the tree of knowledge.
It's almost like the tree of life is a spiritual passcode.
Yes. If you are a supposed spiritual guide, and I ask you for the root access passcode, and you just hand me a massive user manual filled with rules about being a good person,
Then you've just proven to me you don't actually have the key to the system.
that is exactly it. You are asking for the source code, and they are handing you the terms of service agreement.
That is the perfect way to conceptualize it. And, the text takes great pleasure in pointing out the profound irony of this situation.
How so?
Consider how quick religious institutions are to label outside groups as cults or heretics. They project this absolute, unshakable confidence in their own authority.
Right. They are the gatekeepers.
But if you press them on the deepest, most foundational mystery of their own foundational text, the actual meaning of the tree of life, they freeze.
Yeah, the source notes are brutal on this point. They specifically say that if you ask these leaders about the tree of life, they don't know what you are saying.
Right, they can't say anything at all.
And the text uses that silence as forensic evidence. Because they cannot answer, that proves they are the ones trapped in a cult.
They have memorized the vocabulary of the divine, but they lack the actual syntax. The text equates this state of saying nothing of substance with the essence of the tree of knowledge.
So it's a devastating critique of performative religion.
Absolutely. The argument is that mainstream religion is an incredibly beautiful facade.
I mean, you look at the grand architecture, the moving music, the intricate moral philosophy.
And the institutional weight of centuries, yeah. But behind the curtain, it is spiritually vacant. It lacks the breath of life, which this text identifies strictly and exclusively as the raw, unadulterated truth of God's word.
It creates what I think is the most staggering conceptual flip in this entire deep dive. We could call it the cult paradox.
The cult paradox, I like that.
Because the text is arguing that, from a divine perspective, the normative, accepted religious structures of the world, the ones with billions of followers and tax-exempt status,
Yes.
are actually one massive, decentralized cult.
It does not mince words. The deviation from truth is not the fringe group meeting in a basement. The deviation from truth is the global establishment.
And to anchor this deeply provocative claim, the text points to the historical figure of Jesus. It asks the reader to look at the socio-political dynamics of the first century.
It's a brilliant historical anchor. 2,000 years ago, who were the established religious authorities?
The Pharisees, the Sadducees, the scribes.
Right. These are the people who ran the temple, who held the theological degrees, who had the ear of the political elite.
And how did they view Jesus?
They didn't view him as a reformer. They viewed him as a dangerous, deceiving cult leader.
A heretic who was leading the uneducated masses astray.
Exactly. The internal logic of the text hinges on this historical reality. It posits that Jesus was the embodiment of the tree of life 2,000 years ago.
He possessed the true spiritual passcode.
Yes. But the religious establishment of his day was so completely entrenched in the tree of knowledge, so utterly consumed by their behavioral rules, their societal status, and their beautiful outward appearance, that they were functionally blind.
They couldn't recognize the raw truth when it was standing right in front of them in the temple courtyard.
Their immune system rejected it, so they orchestrated his execution.
And the text has this dark, almost cynical observation about the psychology behind that rejection. It essentially says that Jesus's main crime was looking at the religious world and bluntly telling them, you are all being deceived.
But the text notes that doing that was, quote-unquote, too hard.
Yeah. It was an impossible cognitive burden for the masses to bear. To realize that the men in the fine robes, the men who had guided their families for generations, were actually agents of deception.
That was a bridge too far.
The text literally states it's easier to just lie to them.
That phrase, "it's easier to just lie to them," speaks to a profound psychological insight within the text regarding human nature and institutional inertia.
It implies that humanity actually prefers the deception.
The text suggests that humanity possesses a latent preference for the tree of knowledge. People want clear-cut rules. They want beautiful buildings.
They want the social comfort, the networking, and the safety of belonging to the wealthy majority.
Exactly. The tree of life, the raw, unvarnished, revolutionary truth, is deeply destabilizing. It threatens the power structures, it threatens the economy of the institution, and it threatens the individual's sense of comfortable certainty.
Therefore, the institution will instinctively treat the truth teller as a madman or a cult leader,
allowing the actual institutionalized cult to operate in plain sight as the respected religious establishment.
It completely flips the script on how we perceive authority. The people holding the megaphones, wearing the vestments, sitting on the councils, they are the cult. The outcast trying to explain the core passcode is the truth.
Right. So that establishes the baseline paradigm. The tree of knowledge is the false, performative religious world. The tree of life is the hidden, destabilizing truth.
But, okay, that immediately raises a massive logistical question for me. If the tree of knowledge represents this vast planetary network of false prophets who planted those seeds.
How did deception get so widespread, so universally accepted?
Exactly. The text anticipates that exact question, doesn't it?
It does. It moves seamlessly from identifying the nature of the deception to tracing its genealogy. It maps the physical and metaphysical evolution of the entity responsible for spreading the doctrine of the tree of knowledge.
And it does this by tracking the changing terminology used in the biblical text over thousands of years.
Yes, the evolution of the serpent.
It's almost terrifying when you frame it like that. Because we aren't talking about a sequence of isolated historical events. We're talking about a pathogen.
A pathogen is the perfect word for it.
A localized spiritual virus in Eden that finds its first host, and instead of burning out, it learns. It adapts. It mutates into a full-blown institutional pandemic.
Let's trace that mutation. We start in Genesis chapter 3.
Okay, back to the garden.
The serpent is described as the most cunning creature in the field. It approaches Eve. And the text highlights that it doesn't force her. It doesn't overpower her.
It deceives her by subtly twisting the divine word. God says, you will die. The snake just adds a little spin. You will not surely die, your eyes will be open, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil.
The mechanism of deception in that initial encounter is vital to everything that follows. The serpent does not introduce a completely foreign alien concept.
It takes the existing divine command and subtly alters the parameters.
Exactly. It appeals to the human ego, to the desire for elevated wisdom, and to the desire for autonomy. It is a highly localized event.
Yeah.
It happens in a confined space, a garden, and it affects two individuals.
It is
Right. But then, the text hits the fast-forward button. We jump across the Old Testament, through the rise and fall of kingdoms, straight into the Gospels.
Matthew chapter 3, verse 7, and Matthew 23:33. John the Baptist and later Jesus are confronting the religious establishment.
They are standing toe-to-toe with the Pharisees and Sadducees, the men who literally control the religious economy of Jerusalem.
And what do they call them? They don't call them misguided scholars. They don't call them brothers who have lost their way. They call them a brood of vipers. They call them snakes.
And this text argues forcefully that Jesus and John were not just throwing around colorful, metaphorical insults to win a debate.
They were identifying a direct spiritual lineage.
Yes. The DNA of the serpent in the garden had incubated over millennia. It was no longer a single, localized entity whispering in a tree.
It had become an entire socio-economic class of religious leaders.
The snakes had multiplied. They had institutionalized themselves. They had built temples, established courts, and codified their twisted version of the divine word into law. The pathogen had become an endemic disease.
Wait, so it's like a boss fight in a video game that scales up over millennia. It starts as a localized snake in a garden, but it levels up as you progress through history.
That is a very apt analogy. It is a boss that absorbs the power structures of every era it infects. Which brings us to the final apocalyptic stage of this mutation.
Revelation chapter 20, verse 2.
The entity has evolved again. The ancient serpent, the localized snake from the garden, is now explicitly identified as the dragon, the devil, Satan.
And look at the scale of its operation now. It's no longer deceiving two people in Mesopotamia.
No.
It's no longer just corrupting the religious elite of a single city like Jerusalem. The text Revelation says the dragon deceives the whole world.
The physical evolution of the creature directly mirrors the geographical and temporal spread of the false doctrine. What started as a microscopic infection of truth in a garden became a global, systemic pandemic of deception by the time we reached the apocalyptic vision of Revelation.
So the text is emphatically pointing out that the dragon is not a newly introduced monster from outer space.
No, it is simply the ancient serpent, allowed to grow to planetary proportions over thousands of years of human history, feeding on the continuous propagation of the tree of knowledge.
And the text specifically uses this evolutionary timeline to aim a devastating critique at the modern religious world.
It really takes aim at the aesthetics of modern religion.
Right. It argues that this global dragon is the architect behind the beautifully adorned religious institutions we see today. The megachurches with their stadium seating, the ancient cathedrals with their vaulted ceilings.
The golden altars, the billion-dollar broadcasting networks.
The text looks at all of that and labels it the modern brood of vipers.
Which brings us back to the psychological mechanism of that very first deception in Eden. The text zeroes in on a very specific, often overlooked detail about Eve's decision.
Why did she eat the fruit?
Right. The biblical text notes that she saw that the fruit was pleasing to the eye, and she believed it would make her wise.
So it's entirely about aesthetics?
Completely. The text argues that deception must look beautiful, otherwise it would never work.
I mean, that makes perfect sense. If a false doctrine looked ugly, chaotic, and terrifying, human beings would instinctively recoil.
Exactly. It has to look like salvation. It has to look like wisdom. The source notes use a fascinating traditional Chinese idiom to drive this home. Translated into English, the concept is that red beauty is a disaster.
Red beauty is a disaster.
Yes, the idea is that an exceptionally beautiful facade is almost always masking ruin and destruction.
Wow. It is a profound warning embedded in the text. Beautiful things are dangerous.
When a person looks at a massive, ornate religious structure, or listens to a perfectly polished, emotionally resonant broadcast, or follows a highly charismatic leader draped in wealth and success.
The human instinct is to associate that beauty and success with divine favor. We think, well, God must be blessing them because look at how beautiful and successful this is.
The text is screaming the exact opposite. It says, no, that is exactly how the serpent operates. The more beautifully adorned the outside is, the more likely it is to be the tree of knowledge, hiding spiritual death on the inside.
It's all about the packaging, a beautiful box hiding a lethal dose. And the text includes this incredibly quirky, almost physiological detail to ground this abstract metaphysical theology into undeniable human reality.
What of the part about the anatomy?
Yes, it brings up the Adam's apple.
The literal cartilage in the human throat.
It connects the physical bump on the throat, the Adam's apple, to the physical act of swallowing the lie in the garden.
It treats it as a permanent somatic marker, a physical scar passed down through humanity, serving as a constant reminder that we ingested the deception.
And it couples that anatomical observation with a genealogical detail from Genesis chapter 5, verse 3. The fact that Adam lived 930 years before dying.
The inclusion of Adam's lifespan is a fascinating structural choice.
How so? Why focus on the exact number of years?
Because the text uses it to showcase the delayed yet inevitable consequence of the spiritual virus. In the garden, God said, "In the day you eat of it, you shall surely die."
Right. And the snake countered, "You will not surely die."
They ate it, and they didn't drop dead immediately. The snake appeared to be telling the truth, but they lost the true spiritual life instantly, And eventually, the physical body succumbed to that spiritual rot at 930 years.
So the text anchors the metaphysical concept of spiritual deception to our actual anatomy and our inevitable mortality.
Exactly. It's saying to the reader, you don't need to look for a mythological dragon. Look at your own throat. Look at your own finite lifespan. The evidence of the serpent's lie is written into your very biology.
It's a remarkable piece of synthesis. It weaves together human anatomy, ancient idioms, and biblical chronology to argue that the deception isn't just a bad idea floating out in the ether, it is totalizing.
It affects our bodies, our lifespans, and our massive global institutions.
But okay, this brings up a logistical problem.
Let's hear it.
If the serpent has evolved into a massive dragon that is currently deceiving the entire planet, how exactly is it managing that operation? A dragon is a powerful metaphor, but what is the actual tangible infrastructure of this global control grid?
That question pulls us out of the biological metaphors and straight into the sociological reality of the text. Because a deception on a planetary scale requires an administrative center. It requires a headquarters.
And in the visual language of this text, that headquarters is Babylon.
Drawing heavily on chapters 17 and 18 of the book of Revelation, the text paints an incredibly vivid, almost cinematic picture of this infrastructure.
It really does. It describes a figure known as the Great Harlot.
She lives in the great city of Babylon. She is dressed in purple and scarlet. She glitters with gold, precious stones, and pearls.
And she holds in her hand a golden cup full of abominations.
We see the aesthetic principle applied again here. Purple, scarlet, gold, pearls. These are the historical colors and materials of royalty, of priesthood, of divine right. She looks like a queen of heaven.
But the text aggressively strips away that veneer of sanctity.
Very aggressively.
Yeah.
It notes that she doesn't sit on a throne of righteousness. She rides a seven-headed, ten-horned dragon.
And the source text uses language that is intensely provocative to describe this relationship. It refers to the dragon as the boss of the brothel.
When I first read Boss of the Brothel in the source notes, I literally had to pause.
I mean, it's such an aggressive desecration of religious imagery. By calling the dragon the brothel boss, the text is arguing that the entire global religious establishment is not a sanctuary of worship.
It's not a place where humans connect with the divine. It is a spiritual marketplace of illicit transactions, carefully managed by the ultimate deceiver to keep humanity docile and engaged in false practices.
And it emphasizes the sheer scale of this illicit operation.
Yes, the text notes that the harlot sits on many waters. It explicitly interprets these waters as representing all the nations, multitudes, and peoples of the earth.
So the reach is global.
Completely global. The text makes the devastating claim that the entire world has committed fornication with her.
Wait, I need to ask for clarification on this point. This requires us to really drill down into the text's specific definitions, because words like harlot and fornication carry heavy physical and moral baggage.
They do, and the text anticipates that confusion.
Right, because the notes specifically state that God doesn't actually care about humans keeping quote-unquote jade-like purity between each other.
Jade-like purity being a metaphor for physical virginity or chastity.
The text says plainly, God doesn't care about human-to-human physical fornication. So, if we strip away the physical sexual meaning, what exactly is this global fornication that has condemned the entire planet?
This is where the concept of the fake wine becomes paramount. The text states that the harlot makes the world drunk on the wine of her fornication.
Okay, so what is the wine?
Within the cryptographic logic of this text, wine always represents doctrine, teachings, and ideologies.
Oh, I see. So fake wine, therefore, represents false doctrines.
Precisely. The teachings that originate from the tree of knowledge. The global fornication is spiritual infidelity.
It is the act of humanity abandoning the true word of God, the tree of life, and instead buying into the false performative institutional teachings of the global religious system.
It changes the way you look at religious participation.
It really does. When a person sits in a massive sanctuary surrounded by thousands of people and absorbs a sermon that is full of beautiful moral platitudes, but is entirely empty of true, raw spiritual life.
The text views that act as spiritual fornication. You are cheating on the truth with a beautifully dressed lie. You are paying the harlot.
Wow. And the truly terrifying consequence of this transaction, according to the text, is the resulting state of the world.
The world is completely drunk. They have consumed so much of this fake wine generation after generation of false doctrine that they are in a state of deep, systemic, spiritual intoxication.
And the most insidious characteristic of a drunk person is that they almost never realize they are drunk.
That is the key insight. They believe they are thinking clearly, walking a straight line, and speaking profound truth, when in reality, they are stumbling around in a state of spiritual madness, entirely disconnected from reality.
That is a chilling concept. It implies that the fanaticism, the self-righteousness, the culture wars, and the absolute certainty you see in so many religious and ideological movements isn't a sign of deep faith or conviction.
No, it's a symptom of alcohol poisoning. They are drunk on fake doctrine, lashing out because their spiritual motor skills are completely impaired.
The text contrasts this mass intoxication sharply with its definition of sobriety and truth, right?
It points to John chapter 6, verse 63, where Jesus says, "The words I have spoken to you, they are full of the Spirit and life." And 1 John chapter 5, verse 7, which connects the Spirit directly to truth.
For this text, truth is defined entirely as the Spirit, and the Spirit is the unadulterated, unmixed Word of God.
Anything else, no matter how historically venerated, no matter how beautifully packaged in gold and pearls, is fake wine, specifically designed to intoxicate, confuse, and control the masses.
And the text pushes this metaphor to its absolute limit, creating what we could call the matrix of deception.
The matrix of deception.
Yeah, the source notes make a staggering cosmological claim. It says that because everyone is drinking this fake wine, the entire world as it currently exists is actually a hell.
A literal hell. It describes the current world as a vast forest, completely covered by the shadow of the tree of good and evil.
And it says this forest is filled with all kinds of foul birds, which it interprets as evil spirits or demons.
This is the ultimate horrifying conclusion of the Babylon metaphor. If the entire religious infrastructure is a brothel run by a dragon constantly pouring fake wine down the throats of the nations, then the environment it creates is literally a living hell.
It's a world of total spiritual darkness masquerading as light.
People are walking around, attending their services, paying their tithes, performing their rituals, arguing about their moral superiority, and they have absolutely no idea they are trapped in a demonic matrix.
They are spiritually intoxicated prisoners who believe they are the wardens.
It is an incredibly bleak assessment of the human condition.
Seriously bleak. The snake evolved into a dragon, built the infrastructure of Babylon, got the entire planet blackout drunk on fake doctrine, and turned the earth into a spiritual hell masked by a beautiful architecture.
If we stop the story there, it's just a tragedy.
Right. So how does this end? With the entire world trapped under the influence of this fake wine, how does the narrative break the spell?
It turns out, to find the exit to this matrix, the text looks backward. It moves away from the New Testament imagery of Revelation and reaches deep into the Old Testament.
Specifically to the book of Daniel. And in doing so, it takes a highly surprising geographical and modern political turn.
To set up this pivot, the text first establishes a historical pattern of empires rising and falling. It recounts major biblical shifts.
Like what?
Well, it talks about King David and King Solomon building up Jerusalem and Mount Zion as the center of truth. But then it notes how the Assyrian Empire came and destroyed the northern kingdom of Israel.
Okay.
And shortly after, the Babylonian Empire came and destroyed the southern kingdom of Judah, including Jerusalem itself.
Why does it focus on those specific historical tragedies? I mean, why those empires?
By establishing this historical baseline, the text is demonstrating that God historically uses empires to dismantle corrupt systems.
Ah, I see.
Jerusalem was supposed to be the center of truth, but it became corrupt, it became performative, it fell to the tree of knowledge. So the system was destroyed.
This historical pattern of institutional corruption leading to total systemic collapse sets the precedent for the massive apocalyptic vision found in Daniel chapter 4.
Right, Daniel chapter 4. This is where King Nebuchadnezzar, the king of the mighty Babylonian Empire, has a terrifying sleepless night because of a dream.
He dreams of a massive towering tree.
This tree grows so large, so incredibly dominant, that it reaches the heavens, and its branches stretch so wide that it can be seen from the very ends of the earth.
The source text actually makes a somewhat humorous modern comparison here, asking, is there really a tree that big? Maybe the giant redwoods in California.
But it quickly moves past the literal, acknowledging that this tree is a profound metaphor.
Yes, in universal biblical scholarship, a massive tree almost always represents an all-encompassing empire or a totalizing system of power.
In the original historical context of Daniel, it represented Nebuchadnezzar's own Babylonian empire. But in the cryptographic hermeneutic of our source text, this giant tree is the culmination of everything we've discussed.
It represents the global, entrenched institutional system of the tree of knowledge of good and evil.
It is the fully matured, planetary infrastructure of the false religious world. It has grown so large, so wealthy, and so powerful that its shadow covers the entire earth, blocking out the light of truth.
But Nebuchadnezzar's dream doesn't end with the tree just standing there. It takes a sudden, violent turn.
A holy one, a watcher, comes down from heaven and issues a booming decree. He orders the giant tree to be chopped down.
The branches are stripped, the fruit is scattered, and the beasts seeking shelter under it flee.
The text interprets this heavenly decree as the ultimate destruction of the false religious system by the power of unadulterated truth.
And this is exactly where the text makes its most radical, paradigm-shattering departure from orthodox interpretation.
Because it identifies who this Holy One is.
Right. The figure who wields the axe of truth to chop down the Babylonian tree, the text explicitly names him as the Eastern Sage.
That is a massive geographical and cultural pivot.
It really is. The text is taking this ancient Middle Eastern narrative, which was subsequently adopted, weaponized, and utilized by Western civilization as its foundational religious text, and it's suddenly moving the ultimate spiritual savior, the one who finally defeats Babylon to the east.
It is a profound act of theological reclamation. For centuries, the center of gravity for mainstream Christianity has been overwhelmingly Western. Think of Rome, Geneva, London, the vast evangelical empires of the United States.
Yeah, huge centers of power.
This text looks at that massive Western religious infrastructure, identifies it as the corrupt giant tree of Babylon, and declares that the antidote cannot possibly come from within that system.
The cure must come from outside the infection zone.
It insists, as the notes literally say, that Easterners should have this honor.
So it's reclaiming the climax of human history for the East. It's essentially saying, the West built the giant tree of false doctrine. They built the megachurches. They built the massive theological seminaries. They propagated the fake wine.
And the East is going to supply the lumberjack to chop it all down.
But just as I'm wrapping my head around this Eastern Sage concept and the East-West dynamic, the text throws in a highly specific and honestly very jarring modern detail. It suddenly mentions Donald Trump.
Yes, it does.
It's wild because it mentions Donald Trump coming to power in America, and it connects him directly to this concept of Babylon and a historical figure named Belshazzar. I mean, how do we get from the Garden of Eden to ancient Babylon to the 45th president of the United States? What is the mechanical logic that the text uses to justify that leap?
This requires us to look very closely at how the text uses archetypes. To understand the Trump reference, we have to understand how the text defines Babylon.
Okay, so not just the physical ancient city.
Right. The text notes that the word Babylon traces its etymological roots back to Genesis chapter 11, verse 9, and the Tower of Babel. The word essentially means mixed or confusion.
So Babylon isn't just a coordinate on a map in ancient Mesopotamia, it's a state of being.
Exactly. It's a system defined by mixed truths and lies, a system of profound ideological and spiritual confusion. Babylon operates as a universal archetype for the corrupted, dominant world system at any given point in history.
So it views the modern Western world, with its immense political power, its sprawling cultural influence, and its deeply entrenched religious institutions, as the contemporary manifestation of Babylon.
It is the most powerful and therefore the most mixed and confused system on Earth.
Okay, so if the West is modern Babylon, how does Belshazzar fit into this? Historically, Belshazzar is the guy who throws this massive, arrogant feast using the sacred vessels stolen from the temple in Jerusalem.
Right, the feast where everything falls apart.
Right in the middle of the party, he literally sees the writing on the wall. The phantom hand writes his doom, and his empire collapses to the Medes and Persians that very night. He represents the sudden, catastrophic end of an arrogant superpower.
And that is exactly the parallel the text is drawing. The mention of Trump is the text's attempt to map these ancient Babylonian archetypes onto contemporary Western political power.
So it's not a standard political endorsement or condemnation.
Not at all. It is not operating like a news pundit would. Instead, it is treating modern geopolitics as the physical manifestation of underlying spiritual realities.
By connecting an American leader to Belshazzar, the text is arguing that the current global superpower structure, with all its wealth, its media dominance, and its internal polarization,
is the modern embodiment of the giant, confused tree that Nebuchadnezzar dreamed about, and it is teetering on the edge of a Belshazzar-style collapse.
It's treating geopolitics as applied theology. It's saying, look at the dominant powers of the world today. They aren't the pinnacle of human achievement. They're just the latest, most bloated version of Babylon.
They are throwing a feast while the writing is already on the wall.
And the core narrative function of this entire section is that this giant tree of Western and Babylonian dominance is fundamentally flawed, deeply confused, and destined to be chopped down by the pure, unmixed truth brought by the Eastern sage.
That is the essential architecture of its argument. The text builds an unbroken, continuous line, from the subtle deception in Eden to the religious vipers in first-century Jerusalem, to the global dragon of Revelation, to the giant tree of modern geopolitical and religious dominance.
And it positions the Eastern sage as the ultimate disruptor, the anomaly that breaks that entire historical chain of deception.
Which brings us to the climax of the narrative.
Yeah.
We've seen the giant tree identified. We know the Eastern sage is swinging the axe of truth.
So what actually happens to the world when the tree falls? What does the collapse of a planetary matrix of deception look like? What happens when the taps of fake wine are finally shut off?
The text turns back to Revelation for the grand finale, specifically Revelation chapter 18, verse 14, which describes the aftermath of the fall of Babylon.
The verse says to the harlot, "The fruit that your soul longed for has gone from you, and all your dainties and your splendor are lost to you, never to be found again."
Furthermore, the surrounding verses state that the merchants of the earth weep and mourn because no one buys their cargo anymore.
And the text interprets this through its highly unique economic spiritual lens. It doesn't view this as a literal disruption of global supply chains. It isn't talking about merchants selling physical apples, silk, or electronics.
No, it interprets the fruit that can no longer be sold as the false doctrines, the books, the seminars, the tithes of the religious institutions.
Wait, so the text says this verse means the false religious institutions will be forced to literally close their doors.
Yes, they are going bankrupt.
It's a fascinating demystification of apocalyptic language. In traditional Hollywood-style eschatology, the end of the world is almost always depicted with cosmic horror meteors crashing, massive earthquakes, fire raining from the sky, the sun being blotted out.
The text acknowledges the biblical imagery of the sun, moon, and stars falling, but it explicitly interprets this not as a literal astronomical event where celestial bodies hit the earth, but as a sociological and institutional collapse.
The falling stars represent the degradation and ultimate collapse of the false religious luminaries.
Exactly. The mega pastors, the famous theologians, the institutional leaders, they are the stars falling from their positions of power.
I have to admit, I chuckled at the incredibly practical, almost mundane phrasing the text uses to describe the apocalypse. It translates the end of the world into a massive wave of spiritual unemployment.
Spiritual unemployment.
The text literally states that when the true tree of life emerges, when the real unvarnished truth is finally spoken and understood by the masses, all the current Taoist monks, the pastors, the priests, the religious influencers, they will all face mass unemployment.
Because suddenly the spell is broken, and no one is going to buy their fake wine anymore. Their product is entirely obsolete.
It grounds the cosmic battle in a stark socioeconomic reality.
If religion is functioning as a marketplace selling a product, and the text firmly believes the current system is a brothel selling the false doctrine of the tree of knowledge, then the apocalypse is simply the introduction of a superior, undeniable product that instantly crashes the market for the old one.
The text asks this highly rhetorical, slightly sarcastic question to illustrate the tension. Will the pastors say, "Welcome, welcome to the truth"?
And the obvious answer is no.
Right, because they will fight it with everything they have, just like the Pharisees fought Jesus. Because the truth is the axe. As Matthew chapter 3, verse 10 says, the axe is already at the roots of the trees.
The truth destroys their livelihood, their societal status, their multi-million-dollar budgets, and their entire institutional structure.
This is where all the disparate threads of the text synthesize into a final conclusion. The axe at the root is finally swung by the Eastern sage.
The false prophets, who earlier were compared to thorn bushes producing no good fruit, are cleanly cut down and thrown into the fire of obsolescence.
The dragons, those ancient serpents that evolved over millennia to control the mental landscape of the world, are finally bound in the bottomless pit for 1,000 years, as described in Revelation chapter 20, verses 2 and 3.
The era of the pathogen is forcefully ended.
And the text doesn't just leave the reader standing in the rubble. It offers this really profound sense of psychological closure and personal empowerment.
It really does. It references a very strange verse, Mark chapter 16, verse 18.
Right, where Jesus says that true believers will pick up snakes with their hands, and when they drink deadly poison, it will not hurt them at all.
How does the text apply that highly specific physical imagery to its overarching theory of fake wine and false doctrine?
It applies it brilliantly to the concept of spiritual immunity. The text argues that once you truly understand the tree of life, once you have received the true passcode from the Eastern sage, you undergo a fundamental internal change.
You become completely immune to the deception.
So it's not about physically drinking arsenic to prove your faith. It means you can walk directly into the heart of Babylon.
You can pick up the snakes of false doctrine, you can analyze them, and they cannot bite you.
You can be handed a golden cup of the harlot's deadly poison, her fake wine, her beautifully crafted, emotionally manipulative sermons, and you can consume it without it hurting you at all.
You can listen to the most charismatic, persuasive false prophet in the world, and you will see right through the beautiful red packaging to the rot inside. You are immune.
That is the ultimate empowerment this text offers its reader. It transforms the believer from a passive, spiritually drunk victim wandering blindly in the matrix into an awakened, immune observer who calmly watches the giant tree fall.
It is a promise of absolute, unshakable clarity in a world defined entirely by confusion.
Let's take a breath and recap the incredible journey we've just mapped out.
It has been a wild ride.
We started with a localized incident in a garden, a snake whispering a slight modification of the truth to two people.
We watched that biological pathogen evolve, multiplying into a brood of vipers running the temples of Jerusalem, and eventually growing into a planetary dragon running a global spiritual brothel.
We examined how that dragon built the vast infrastructure of Babylon, intoxicating the entire world with the fake wine of performative, externally focused religious doctrine.
Effectively turning the earth into a spiritual hell masked by beautiful architecture and rigid moral codes.
And finally, we saw the text shift the epicenter of salvation completely away from the West, introducing an Eastern sage wielding the axe of truth to chop down the giant tree of Western and Babylonian dominance.
And the result isn't fire falling from the sky, but the total collapse, the mass unemployment of the global religious establishment.
It is a breathtakingly ambitious synthesis of theology, ancient history, psychology, and modern geopolitics. Whether one accepts its premises or dismisses it entirely, the internal consistency of its cryptographic logic forces you to reevaluate how deeply ancient texts can be interpreted, recontextualized, and weaponized to explain the modern condition.
It truly is the definition of a paradigm-shattering perspective.
And that brings us to the end of today's deep dive. But before you take off those polarized glasses and step back out into the real world, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over. We just spent our time looking through a very specific, radically different lens at ancient texts and modern institutions. The text argues that the most beautiful, the most established, and the most unquestioned structures in our world are actually the most dangerous.
It really flips everything on its head.
It makes you wonder. Step outside of just religion for a second. Look at the structures in your own life. Look at your industry, your political affiliations, your deeply held societal beliefs. How many of the belief systems we take for granted today, the ones we think are keeping us safe, are viewed by someone else as a giant, overgrown tree of good and evil just waiting for an axe?
It is a sobering thought.
When everyone, including you, believes they are holding the key to the tree of life, how do you really know you aren't the one walking around completely drunk on the fake wine? Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. Keep questioning the map, keep looking behind the beautiful facades, and we'll see you next time.